All right. We'd like to welcome everybody today to this webinar to deal with the church in crisis strategies to manage soaring costs and secure coverage with insurance for churches. A couple housekeeping issues. Before I do introductions, my name is John Musica. I'll be your host today. As we go through this presentation, it is being recorded, so if you have to step out or you miss something, you'll be able to see the replay. If you have a question, we would like for you to put that in the Q&A box, not the chat box. Just go to the Q&A, ask a question, and we will do our best to answer it here on this webinar. If we don't answer it today, we will try to follow up with you. We have your email contact information. We would love to follow up and get your questions answered. This is a critical topic that we want to discuss today, and obviously you're here to listen to it, so you see it as a critical topic as well. My name is John Musica. I'm an associate broker with Church Realty based out of Plano, Texas. We serve churches in Texas and have served churches around the country with all their real estate needs. And we've heard a lot of churches and our clients and our friends tell us that they are experiencing some issues with insurance costs rising. And so I said, well, we got to address this. And so I called my friends at Insurance One agency. They do a great job serving churches. And so we're like-minded, want to serve the church. And so I called them, and Paula Burns and John Lyons are here with us today, and I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves, but we are glad you're here, and we look forward to this next bit of time. So Paula, if you want to introduce yourself, let's go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you for being here. Thank you, John, for having us and including us. My name is Paula Burns. I've been in the industry about 40 years and serving the church nonprofit industry, a sector, since about 2001. So we've seen a lot of changes over the years, and I'm so glad to be here today. We're based out of Dallas, Texas, and we look forward to visiting with all of y'all today. John?
Yeah. Again, thank you all so much for taking the time. My name is John Lyons. I'm the VP of Business Development, which means not only am I an agent and serve my churches, but I also kind of oversee the production here at Insurance One and have a few other agents that are doing the same thing. And we're trying to spread our knowledge as far as we can to serve everyone. So been doing it for quite a while, but we really love to be able to partner with churches and serve. As you guys are the experts in the gospel and discipleship and all those things, we like to partner with you so you don't have to worry about this part of it or have to have that knowledge. You just have a really good partner that you trust, and you call us and say, hey, John, we got a question about X, Y, Z, whatever that is, and we help walk you through that. So looking forward to continuing to do that and hopefully give you some really good knowledge to be better prepared for the market that's coming up.
All right. Well, thank you for those introductions. And so let's dive right into this. We've got several questions. I'm going to ask Paula and John. They're going to answer. And then again, as you have a question, please go ahead and put it in the Q&A box, and we will have some time to address those at the end. So Paula, I would like to start with you. Why is church insurance in crisis and facing these significant increases in costs? And I'll also say I've had clients who called and said, we're just flat out not being renewed. So what's happening that's causing this?
Well, I've been in this for many years. I've never seen a market like this. And those of you who have joined us that are with different ministries all over the nation, I know this is probably something y'all have never seen. This is the longest running hard market in history that we've ever seen in the insurance industry. And hard market is very different. It typically will have an event that'll cause that. And then, the market will react, but this has been consistent. It's created, stricter underwriting standards. So some churches that could get insurance before now maybe has a claim, or they've got frame construction, or they're older. Now it's outside those underwriting guidelines where you never had problems before. There is only so much capacity that the carriers have. So everybody goes to London to get what we call reinsurance. For example, an insurance carrier will say, on this church that's $20 million, we'll hold on and we'll insure in our capacity the first 10 million, but we're going to sell off to London and get reinsurance for the other 10. Well, London's capacity is reduced, and the carriers have had so many claims that they're saying, oh, maybe we're only going to take 5 million of this 20 and we're going to sell off the 15. Well, when you get into that layer, it's more expensive. That's what's creating some of the increased cost as well as higher claims. And we're going to get into that question in a minute. But in a nutshell, you're seeing higher premiums. You're probably getting less coverage for, you may have a higher deductible now and have to pay out more plus pay a higher premium.
So, what causes the hard market? Obviously, we understand supply and demand, but just what causes that hard market?
Well, as everybody knows, it seem like every time you turn on the TV, there is some kind of major weather event. I mean, right now, my goodness, who would have ever thought we would see the catastrophe that Asheville and those areas in North Carolina are going through, South Carolina. It's and the losses are exponential. So just for an example, the US saw $28 billion single event, billion-dollar weather-related disasters in 2023. And we've got some notes up here costing $95 billion to carriers. So carriers, their loss ratios, they're not taking in as much as they're billing, as they're paying out. And when that happens, they have to raise rates, and they're not willing to risk as much. So what they're wanting to do basically is say, if I only have capacity for, let's say, in an area, 100 million, am I going to go write the church that might be older with frame construction, not sprinklered, or am I going to go write the church that's new construction and sprinklered and steel, steel? So they're looking at that when they're doing the qualifying process. So this has been, this is what we're seeing. It's basically a seller's market from that perspective. They are picking and choosing. So that pushes the churches that might not have newer construction, might not have sprinklers. That risk may be a little higher for the carrier. It's pushing them into a place we've never seen before with these exponential premiums. And we've got on the liability side, you've got the property side, which I was just talking about, the older construction, not sprinkler, those factors to consider. But now we've had a lot of our juries are giving out huge awards. So we're calling it social inflation, where we're getting these what we call nuclear verdicts of millions of dollars, which we have not had that trend before. It's just been building. So that's happening on the liability side. So you're seeing not only your property rates increase, look at those liability rates, they're increasing too, as well. So all of these factors are coming to a head at the same time.
So, Paul, I want to ask two questions in one thing. If anybody has a question, and if you raise your hand, which this great software allows us to do, if you'll type a question in the Q&A, I can address that better, as opposed to trying to answer a raised hand. So just wanted to clear that up. But there was a question that I wanted to mention to you before we go further, Paula. Someone asked, when you say London, you mean Lloyd's of London, and what is... maybe a little bit more on reinsurance, because I don't know, I know that's not something that's common to me, to John Musica. So can you really just give a quick snapshot on that before I move to the next question?
Lloyd's of London, that's where everything started in the insurance arena. And there are certain syndicates there that have your capacity. So your insurance carrier, let's say it's a Travelers, okay? They are going to go out after after they retain so many million, let's say your building value or your liability, and then they're going to go buy reinsurance, which is just backing up the additional limit. Let's say you have a $20 million building and Travelers is going to retain 5 on the property. Then they're going to go out and buy the additional limit from one of those syndicates over at Lloyd's. And that's what we are talking about when we talk about reinsurance. And those costs have been skyrocketing.
Yeah, Paula, one of the things I was going to say, that the easiest way, and I think you explained it to me, was that just think of reinsurance as the insurance carriers are going to buy insurance on the policies that they're writing.
That's right.
And that cost that they have to go buy that insurance, and their costs are going up, and that trickles down to the buyer, which is us. You see it on your home, you see it on your church. That, because their rates are higher, our rates are now getting higher. So hopefully that helps kind of simplify it.
Yeah, thanks. That is very helpful. So, John, what adjustments should churches make to secure and maintain proper coverage? They've had coverage, and now their insurer is saying, "Sorry, we're not doing this. We're not renewing you." What adjustments do churches need to make?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. The part of it, the easiest way is just kind of plan ahead and be proactive. So we've kind of put together some steps you can take. Now, if you're in that 30-day window and you just got the letter and it said you're being non-renewed, some of these are going to be pretty hard for you to do within that 30-day window. But if you just renewed and they did renew you and you've got a year, you've got a little bit more time and a little bit more runway to kind of start some of that proactive things that we're going to talk about here. The first one is understanding your values of your church. And if you have not gotten a replacement cost appraisal within the last 3 years, that's usually when we recommend that you go in and do that again, because most of your carriers are going to just give you a small incremental increase of your values over time. So let's say if you got $1 million replacement cost value, and those are two things as well. Understand this isn't what you could turn around and go sell your church for. It's replacement cost value, and that if your building burned down or got hit by a tornado, what it would cost to rebuild the building you have. And a lot of carriers, yeah, a lot of carriers are, they're looking at the small increases. What we've seen a lot with Church Mutual, if you have a Church Mutual policy now, or if you've been non-renewed with them, their values have been really low and have not really caught up with the market. And so there's quite a bit of shock to a lot of churches who are now thrown back into that market, that they were maybe insured for $125 or $150 a square foot. And now the market is way past that. We're seeing it somewhere between $250 to $300 a square foot because of cost of labor and materials. And that directly equates to your total insured value. And then that is where the premium comes from. And so if you see a number that doubles from what you were currently insured with, then your premium's going to double, and that's going to be the big shock. And now you've got to try to figure out how to insure that properly. And so knowing your values and understanding, are you insured properly, and do you need to be insured properly, or where your risk tolerance is a big piece. So getting an appraisal, or if you have someone in your church that owns a construction company that could go in and they know the current cost of materials and labor and those things and can put something together for you, that's very helpful. But just throwing a number out, the underwriters aren't going to take that. We need official documents showing and backing up where we get our replacement cost numbers, that we turn that into them. The other piece of this is just updates that you're doing to your property. So if you've got an older building, maybe it was built in 1965, brick building, what are the updates that you guys are doing or have done or can you do? Because now, because of that limited capacity, we have quite a few carriers that they're not writing anything over 25 years old. It's outside of their guidelines at that point. But if you do updates, it brings that back into that window. So some of them, if you bring it down to the studs and you update electrical, plumbing, some of those other things, then that was considered, even though it was built in 1965, your recent updates bring you back into their guidelines, so that you can be offered a quote from certain carriers. So being able to look at what are some of the updates you've done. Your roof is a big one. whether or not you have the capacity to update your roof, or when is the window when you've done it, or what type of maintenance you're doing on your building. Any of those things that you can do to upkeep or present to a carrier that you are doing and maintaining your property, that's a big one. We've got so many that they've had deferred maintenance for time and time and time. And so now when it comes to get insurance, these carriers who have limited capacity, they're just not interested in it because they're looking for A and B rated buildings. And if you've got deferred things that need to happen, that they just automatically put it outside of those guidelines. So putting a plan together on how you can update is a big piece, or can you do it in stages? And then what we do is go and we fight for you with the underwriters and those carriers, and having an agent who can go and do that and say, hey, yes, they know they're a little bit behind, but they have a plan, and here's their plan. This is what this looks like. Here are the things they're going to update over the next 6 months, over the next 9 months. And those things are a big help, and we can show them an actual plan that you have in place, and they'll get behind that. They may offer lower coverage at the moment, but once you start doing the things that are on that plan, they can upgrade that. So the other part, those are really more property driven, but outside of that, having really good policies and procedures from a liability side. So we were talking with a carrier the other day, and they were saying that because of these big lawsuits and these kind of atomic abuse claims and different things like that, where these lawyers are just going in, they're asking for the limit. So if they've got a $2 million limit, they're going in and getting the $2 million limit. And so what that has done to our carriers is saying, hey, if these lawyers are going to go ask for the limit, well, we're going to lower the limit so that they can't ask and get $2 million out of us. They can only get 500,000 out of us. And so because of that litigation, it's dropping down. So to get higher limits, we have to show them that we've got really good procedures in place. So a written sexual abuse policy that all of your volunteers are presented and they sign and they look at, but trying to close that gap of where someone can kind of get through. The other piece of that is your building use agreement. I know everybody wants to allow your building to be open and have people come in, but there is liability that comes with that. And if we can have a really solid building use agreement and we make sure we're asking for additional insured status and things like that, we're adding these layers of protection for our church that not only help us or help the church, but now a carrier feels more comfortable because they're not the primary on that. Their risk exposure is shrunken because of the fact that you have a really good building use agreement, or there's additional insurance that's on there. And so looking at what those things are and how you go about that and how you vet who uses your building is a big deal that can help with your limits and increase those limits and help get a little bit better pricing on that. The other part is just kind of look at any of your open claims. What can you do to get those closed, get those off the books, and even more so partnering with your agent if you have losses. When you have them, call your agent, talk to them, and walk through that, because it may not be worth putting in a claim because it's going to hurt you in the long run, especially if it's close to your deductible, or maybe it's a little over your deductible, but it may cost you an extra $1,000 now, but it may cost you an extra $10,000 in premium because you're going to get non-renewed, or you're going to have to go to out to market and get caught up with what the rates are. So being very strategic about how you go about your losses is very important as well. And then the other part is just working with someone who specializes in churches, right? You can find an agent out there, but if all they write is residential, or all they write are construction companies, or all that, whatever it is, if it's not churches, it's really come down to the fact that you need someone who specializes in this market and has really good relationships with the carriers that write churches, because there's a ton, especially when Paula was talking. I mean, Paula helped, a couple of these carriers get started in the church market 20 years ago, and she helped develop their policies and procedures. And so they know Paula and I's risk management strategies with our churches. And if they trust us and they know that what we bring to the table has really good abuse limits and has really good building use agreements and all those things, if they've just got agent A who's never written a church with them before, and they've got Paula and I sitting there next to each other, they're going to look at ours first. And so having a specialized agent that does that, whether it's not us, maybe it's someone else, but just ask those questions, interview your agent and say, hey, do you specialize in churches? How many churches do you write? And how are you going to fight for us in the marketplace? because that's what you need right now, is someone who is genuinely going to pick up the phone, call those underwriters and say, hey, this is why you want this church. This is why this makes sense to put on your books. I know you have limited capacity, but this is one you want inside that capacity, and here's why. And have them really fight and have those conversations in those markets.
Exactly. You know, underwriters that used to be looking at possibly 50 pieces of new business a month, they're getting hundreds on their desk. So they're going to pick up that submission where they trust that agent, that agent knows what they're doing, that they know that submission that they're sending, all of the information they're sending in is going to be complete. They understand that work. So it's so important. John, we got, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, when I help churches buy properties, used to be that we could go the week of closing and get an insurance policy and get that taken care of. John, you and I are talking the other day, and I think you recommended they need to look 45 days ahead of time. Is that right?
Easily.
So,
Yeah.
you know, if you're going to somebody that's writing it in a week, they may not be doing all the, you know, there's guys who do insurance, but they do it for residential. It's just like, if you want to buy a house, don't call John Musica. My brother Robert does residential. You can call him, but I don't do residential real estate. I help churches. And so that's my area of expertise. You can probably find an insurance guy to write you a policy. It may not be the right policy. And so that's why you want to get with somebody who understands what they're doing, understands your needs, and can ask the right questions to get you the right coverage, and then to fight for you when you're in time of a claim. So, okay, good stuff. We're getting a lot of good questions. I'm not going to go to all of the questions right now. We'll come back to these in a little bit. I want to move on, and then we will hit those questions a little bit. Paula, what options are available for churches that are facing these steep premium increases or just non-renewals?
It's going to depend on, we were talking about those factors. How old is the church? Where are you located? Is it frame construction? What type of construction? Those are a lot of factors, and they're going to be very specific. I can say this: if you do have losses and you have, let's say you have been recently impacted by one of those, it's very difficult for an agent to market you while that claim is open. Being expedient about getting your work done, get it completed. Don't just, sit on that, get the repairs done. If you have a liability loss, even if it's just a slip and fall, be in communication with that adjuster or your agent. Get those things closed out. We had an account, maybe 6 months ago, John? It was a small couple $1,000 slip and fall. And it literally cost that church thousands of dollars in additional premium because we had to move them to another carrier. And it was so difficult to market them while there was an open just slip and fall claim. So it's we've got to be a little bit more proactive on that. We can always help. We need to understand the factors of your situation, but there are a lot of people being non-renewed for no fault of your own. The carrier just may simply be pulling out of the state, right?
Right.
So, there are a lot of factors involved in that, but John just went through that list of things that we can do, the updates to our property, update the property worksheet, get a spreadsheet, put your buildings, year built. We can send you an example that you ought to, keep on file every time you redo plumbing, electrical, HVAC, your roof. Keep all of that. You're really giving the carrier something to say, hey, pick me. You only have so much capacity, and my church might be 50 years old, but it's like it's brand new because we've kept up with it, right? So you're showing that carrier that piece of paper, and that's going to be so helpful to your agent.
Yeah, and it might even be good for somebody to have an inspector come in and inspect your property every once in a while. I know a few years ago, was it 2021, we had the big freeze here in Texas, and a lot of people, their problem was their fire sprinkler pipes froze and burst because maybe they weren't insulated properly. And so things that you could catch that maybe you could do do preventative maintenance. I think the preventative maintenance is something that oftentimes when I go into a church building and look at it, that there's just been a lot of that's been deferred. That, well, we don't need to spend the money on that right now, or we don't have the money and it hasn't been prioritized. And then you have a huge loss. So I think that's really good feedback on that. And y'all are such good professionals. When the question guy gets something and goes out of order, y'all just ran with it. So let me come back to you, John. What additional types of insurance coverage should churches consider beyond property insurance?
Yeah, so I know the biggest need right now, obviously, is you've got your property. That's what's hard in the market. It's your property. But outside of that, there are other things that a church needs that are going to be protected. And because sometimes there's a panic and you're jumping to a carrier you may not be familiar with, or even a carrier because it's price driven that doesn't offer all of the coverages that a church needs. These are things that you need to be very cautious of, and just make sure that you're asking the right questions, especially when it comes to liability. Are you getting high enough limits that you need for your church? But just making sure the liability side, so that's your slip and falls, the things that happen as people are on site at your church, your professional coverages, your religious expression coverages, things like that are going to help protect your church. That, again, other carriers, your legacy carriers, things like that, just may not cover because they're not used to covering churches. A big one is your abuse coverages. Some of them won't even offer abuse coverages, and that's one of your biggest exposures, is your sexual abuse and molestation coverage. And maybe they'll offer it, but it's a $50,000 or $100,000 limit. And right now we're seeing it at least $1 million on some of these large claims. And so your church will be out of pocket because that insurance company is only going to pay up to $100,000. And then anything outside of that, your church will have to come up. And some of them are having to close their doors because, they didn't have the right policy and procedure. Something happened. There was a lawsuit. They didn't have enough limit. They're closing down. So be very cautious about what those limits are. Another one is your directors and officers insurance. So that's your leadership team. That's your board, typically your pastor, your board of elders, things like that are making leadership decisions on behalf of the church. What this directors and officers really helps protect, to some extent, it's their personal wealth, right? So the church is the one that is primary in the lawsuit. If it's a decision or something like that, it's them acting on behalf of the board. And if you've got someone on your board who's, say, the CEO of Coca-Cola or something like that, it's gonna help protect their personal wealth outside of that because of a decision they were making on behalf of your church. And so if you're asking someone to be a leader or to help make leadership decisions, one of the best things that you can do to help protect them is to make sure your church has directors and officers insurance to sit outside of that. I know for myself and Paula, we sit on many boards and we won't do it unless they have directors and officers insurance at all. And there's a lot of CEOs and things like that if they ask that question, they won't sit on your board unless you have those type of protections. So it's important to get the right people on and also help protect them. Workers' compensation, I know it's not required in the state of Texas, but that's going to help cover you and your employees and your staff if someone were to get hurt. That's not going to fall under your, just your normal liability. If they're on staff, that's going to be your workers' compensation. So it's going to help. We see quite a few, and you're not thinking, usually it's the youth pastor, right, who's zip lining off the roof into the baptistry or something crazy. Yeah, they may get hurt, but we see more and more of, Miss Sue, who just happened to trip over a box of paper next to the copy machine. We see a lot of those, or somebody gets hurt on stepping down off the stage or things like that those can be lingering and could cost the church a lot more. Or you may lose an employee over it. So having a workers' compensation policy. And the last one that's coming up a lot more is just your cyber liability. There's two pieces to it. There's the social engineering, which we're probably all familiar with, right? You get an email that looks like it's coming from the pastor that says, hey, I need you to go buy 5 $250 gift cards and send it to a member of our church. Or now they're getting a little bit more advanced and they're pretending to be one of your vendors. So they get into your system and they hack, and maybe your lawn maintenance company, and they're saying, hey, we changed our billing. Can you now send the payment for this invoice to this other bank? We had a church that did that, and they changed the bank to somewhere in New Jersey. and they didn't even think twice about it, and they sent $7,000 that way. So that's a social engineering part where someone gets in and tricks you. And then the other piece is kind of your data retention, your data breach, where you see that they come in and maybe hold your system ransom, and some of those. I mean, we had one. It was they were holding it ransom. It was $250,000. And your cyber company, if you have a good cyber policy and a good cyber carrier, they're going to come in. They're going to help negotiate that ransom for you. They're going to come in and help add protections to your systems and things like that. The one we were talking to the other day, they will actually send for free these little monitoring pieces for up to 10 computers in your office, and they'll let you know, hey, we've got an unfamiliar bad actor that's snooping around within your system. You need to shut things down, or so those proactive ways that you can get outside of that come with a cyber liability policy. But those are just other things to start looking at and make sure that you have a full scope of protection. Again, I know with how some of the property insurance is going, you may have to look at this and go, okay, we can't do cyber this year, but we definitely want to make sure we have abuse and directors and officers. So be sure, if you've got a certain budget with that you are working with your agent to say, hey, this is what we can do. How can we get the most bang for our buck and get the best coverage for what we can do on that?
That's good. I think, John, I wanted to say, yes, most of this discussion is about property insurance, and that's where people are feeling it. But these topics right here that are on your screen in front of you are super critical to your church. And I can think about just liability insurance. And there was a question in the Q&A section asking about their leasing to another church, and should we require them to list us as an additional insured? Absolutely, 1000%. And that's on liability. And I usually tell churches it needs to be $1 million, $1.5 million on, if something happens while that tenant is there in your building, you need to have them list you as an additional insured. It does not cost them any extra, but that's something they need to do on their liability policy.
They also need to be, and there are about 5 or 6 questions here about a building use agreement. We're happy to send that out to the. I've got a sample that Attorney Greg Love wrote for us. It's so important that anyone leasing, utilizing your facilities, signs a building use agreement, because it's, first of all, it's identifying where they're going to be using the space, when they can use it, and that it has to be used with the accordance of your statement of faith, right? All of those things are outlined. It's transferring their exposure with the additional, you're capturing that additional insured status, because most of the time, 95% of policies are written that additional insured extends only as required by written contract. So you could be asking the church to name you an additional insured, but if you don't write it in a written contract, it's not going to extend. It's just a piece of paper. So that's so important that you enter into that building use agreement. And there's a lot of things I can say on that. I'll keep that short, but there's also in our sample agreement some screening if they do have children. Let's say it is that church that, to your question, that's leasing that space. Well, they're going to have children on site. It's asking them to sign off that they are doing some screening procedures to reduce that sexual misconduct coverage. Because if they have a claim and it's big and it's an abuse claim, everybody gets brought to the table, even the site that is extending the use of the facility, even though they have no control over that. So that's so important.
I'm looking at a couple of questions here. Somebody asked a question when I mentioned an inspector from an insurance company or an independent inspector. What I was talking about is sometimes it's helpful to have somebody come walk through your building and just do a review. So it doesn't have to be somebody from the insurance company. Just have a property inspector come inspect your property and say, hey, what things are we missing? If you don't have a full-time facilities person that's maintaining those things, because a lot of the churches that are on this call, you don't have 2 or 3 people on staff walking your building every week going, what do we need to look at? So sometimes you can have an outside property inspection company come out and just give you a report. I think that will set you up to put yourself to go, here's the things we need to take care of, so that in case of a loss down the road, we could maybe avoid that. Somebody else asked a question. They got paid for damage to their roof and did not repair. Will that affect their rate?
That's going to be very difficult. You really need to get that repaired. Number one, there's going to be a lot of confusion. You have of, is this damage prior to or damage since then? And yeah, and then you have unrepaired damage. If you need to be moved to another carrier and you have a claim, they are always going to ask, was this damage repaired? And they're going to be doing an inspection when they come out and look. Will come out as well. So absolutely get that repaired. It's not about, is this going to affect our rate? It's about, are you going to be insurable or not? Okay, that's what it's gotten down to.
Or it may create exclusions, right? If it's a roof and they know there's damage, then they'll just exclude it because anything that they have, it's pre-existing damage, and so they're not going to say,
Yeah.
hey, we're going to cover that because you've already had damage that maybe weakened an area or something like that, and so you're just putting yourself at risk for having a portion of your building not covered at all. So it's definitely in your best interest to go ahead and do that. It's very similar to just having an open claim, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Well, I see several people also asking about a building use agreement. If you're talking about a lease agreement between you and another church, I'm happy to send that to you. If you want to send me an email, my email is johnm@churchrealty.com. I've got a couple different building use agreements, so I want to make sure I send you the right one. So I may follow up and ask you a few questions about, is this another church that's using it a few hours, or a school? I kind of want to make sure I send you the right thing. And then, Paula, you said earlier, the property worksheet y'all have, that's something we can supply to folks on this call today, right?
Now, I have a facility use agreement written by my attorney specifically for churches. It's not a lease. This is for when people are just utilizing the facility. Let's say they're coming in and using the facility. They could be consistently using it, or, coming in for events, every week. I have that, John, that is for that facility usage, not a lease.
That's a really good point. So anytime you have someone come in, whether they're having it for just a 1 hour meeting, or they're doing a full lease where they're coming to your building every week, you need to have these issues addressed.
Right.
I deal with it on leases, but what Paul is mentioning is, if you just let some, I mean, if people are voting at your church right now for early voting or on election day, you need to have coverage for those kind of events. You have a sports league playing, or using your fields or using your gym, you've got to have those coverages. So those are extremely important. So we will get those to you. Okay, thanks. Let's get back on the questions. Paula, I have a question for you. What are the key considerations when moving from a standard market to a non-standard market?
Well, right now, what's happened is a lot of churches are not able to get coverage through what we call a standard market. Standard markets are admitted in the state. They're going to have names such as Philadelphia, Hanover, Church Mutual. You're on the personal line side, your State Farm. Those are standard markets. They're licensed in the state. They're backed by state funds. Okay. Well, what happens if right now, because we're in such a hard market, there are a lot of churches that are either being non-renewed, maybe no fault of their own, but maybe they're older. And, with capacity issues, carriers may be saying, no, we're not going to cover you. We can't find a standard market to cover them. Then we have to go to what's called a non-standard market. Someone who's not admitted in the state. That is not necessarily a bad thing. Those carriers have to have more financial stability. They're going to look at them. They're not going to let them do business here unless they are, have good, strong financials. So most of those carriers are A-rated. They're all A-rated that we deal with. But there's more flexibility. They don't have to file the forms in the state. So they can take on different exposures that your standard carriers may not. So we're seeing a lot of people move to that. Big thing that you need to think about, the coverages are normally different on the property. If you're going to one that your standard carriers usually have an endorsement that might give you outdoor property at 50,000. Okay, that's covering your, some of your playgrounds, fencing, light poles, things like that. Where a non-standard carrier, you may have to schedule those things. So you really need to talk to your agent about all of the activities that you have that are not just your buildings, that be outdoor property, your business income. You have loss of business income typically in a standard market where you would not have that automatically in a non-standard typically. So, if you've got a school there, it's very important because you're still having to pay teachers. Say we have a tornado come and wipe us out. That's part of our disaster preparedness planning. What would we do? Would we go rent another building? That business income is going to help an extra expense help fill that gap. So look at those coverages, talk to your agent, your advisor about that. On the liability side, we're seeing limits be, they're not taking on, typically if I've got a really large church, I've got 5 million in abuse, that non-standard carrier is not as likely to come in with as high a limit. So we may have to go buy more limit on top of that. So those are areas to look at. That's why you need an advisor to help move you and navigate through this. It's not like our regular smooth seas that we've been sailing for many years. If we get in that situation where you're being non-renewed, there's not a standard carrier to take you, you really need someone to walk you through that.
And Paula, to that point, we had a church about a month and a half ago that we started working with, and they had an agent that was not very familiar with churches and did not know the carriers really well. And because of that, their main carrier for their liability did not, for that, when we started diving in and looking at their policy, we noticed that carrier, that they did not offer any abuse coverage, and they were paying an additional $20,000 for a surplus lines abuse policy. But Paul and I know that carrier really well. We write with them quite often, and we knew that they offered abuse coverage. And we started asking the right questions. They hadn't had any losses. There were no issues. They hadn't a written abuse policy. They checked all the boxes. But what the difference was is the agent just didn't know that carrier would have offered it, or didn't even think to ask the question why it wasn't on the policy. And he just said, well, to solve the solution, we're going to go buy an extra abuse policy for $20,000. Immediately, we were able to go in, take that over, have conversations with that carrier, get that added to their normal policy, and cancel and save them $20,000 just because we understood how that carrier operates. That's why it's extremely important to have someone who specializes in this. I know a lot, if a lot of you on here were with Church Mutual, for the most part, you've been with them with a direct carrier. You've had one agent who just writes Church Mutual. And it's really important for you to understand that in the agency world, getting a good independent agent that has multiple options. So every year, Church Mutual has been your option. Getting an agent that has multiple carriers and can go do the work for you and go fight that battle and knows the carriers to go to, so that you're not wasting your time with a carrier that's not even going to write a church. They're just going to send it back. That's going to be a big help. And in the end, how you interview and pick that agent could cost you literally $20,000 if they don't know how to put your policy together the correct way. So making sure you do that, and what needs to be standard and what needs to be surplus is a big piece of that.
That's really good. Okay, John, what should you do if you get a notice of non-renewal or cancellation from your current carrier?
Yeah, so I'd say the first thing is ask yourself, am I with a direct agent, or this was their only option and now they don't have anything else they can offer? Or is my current agent, have they been doing a really good job, and then this carrier just non-renewed us, and do they have us taken care of? Are they ahead of it? Do they know what's going on? Are they already sending me out to market, right? Ask those questions, call your agent and say, what's going on? Why was I non-renewed? Do we have any options there? Or are you already marketing me out anywhere else? And then find out, hey, do we feel like they're adequately going to market us? You can even ask them, who are you going to market our church to? And have them give you a list of the markets that they're going to go to. Make them ahead of time, find out who they're going to. And then If you're not confident in that, give another agent a call or start interviewing other agents. Give us a call. And then you can share that list, because this is going to be important, because carriers are only going to offer one quote to one agent, and it's whoever gets there first, right? So let's say you've got Church Mutual and Guide One. If Paula and I were competing agents, and Paula already made a submission for your church to Guide One, then if I go there second, they're just going to say, hey, you're blocked here. There's already an agent who's gone in. And so by having multiple agents competing for your business in the marketplace, it's not helping your church. And here's why, is because you want to have one agent that you trust, that's your partner, and you know all the carriers that they're going to, and then they are fighting for on your behalf with the carriers, because you want competition at the carrier level. You don't want it at the agent level, because we don't dictate price. But what we do is we go in and I can see quote A and I can see quote B, and I can get, if quote B is better, I can go back to carrier A and say, hey, I've got a quote that's better than this. You need to rework your numbers, and you need to come in. If you really want this church, this is how you're going to have to do. This is what you're going to have to do to get there. And we can get them competing against each other. Or we already know the carriers that are going to be competitive, and we're already fighting that battle for you. So you want someone who understands it, who can go fight for you and can bring those options back. But if you do bring other agents in, the best thing you can do, like I told you, is get a list of the markets that the first agent went to, present that to the second agent and say, are there markets on this list that they don't have or they have not approached that you could go get for me? And then at that point, now you're spreading it out a little bit more, and that you're giving better options for your church, because that first agent was never going to go to those additional markets, or maybe didn't have access to those additional markets. But it does help to have that expert. But really, if you take anything away from that, find an agent who can get you competition at that carrier level, and then your church is going to really come into play and benefit the most from that.
And I would add to that, John, I mean, it's so important making that decision up front, because, there's not a lot of church carriers, okay? Especially if you've got a little bit more property value, you're limited. So if you've got an agent that's not what they specialize in, but they've burned a market, they've already got one blocked. Well, remember I said that underwriter might have 200 submissions sitting on that desk, okay? You need an agent that's going to push it, that's got that relationship, that's calling them on their cell going, hey, I just sent you this, let's bump this up. Make sure the agent that you pick to be lead, because you give them loss runs, they run out, block all the markets. They may not be pushing it or have the relationship to walk it like somebody who's an expert does. So be very careful in that process. I would definitely interview your agents. Interview them.
And the last thing I'd say is, if you get that letter, do not wait on it. The market right now is not what it used to be. And that I've had so many churches that have come and said that it's already lapsed. They're now bare because they waited too long, thinking, oh, we'll just get a quote. It'll take us a couple days, and they keep putting it off. The second you get that letter, try to get out to market as fast as you can. And the more you can already have that property worksheet together, and you can already have those things ready to go, because so many times we may get with a church and then it takes us a week to go through, and they've got to find the person that was there when the church was first built to answer some of these questions, or to get some of the updates, or answer questions on the application. It takes a little bit. And every second, when you're, especially in this tight window that we're in, the longer you take, the harder it's going to be. Or we may lose markets who say, hey, look, there's just not enough time for us to look at it. We'll look at it next year. And now you've lost a whole market because you didn't get out in time. But the days of having a week to be able to quote something, or even 2 weeks, they're just not there anymore. You don't have that luxury anymore. So if you get a notice, which should be at least 30 days, get out to market as quickly as you can for your church. That's one of the best things you can do.
We would love 60 days, okay?
Yeah.
Because we want to be about 45 days out on that submission if we can. That underwriter is more apt to go, oh, I have a little breathing room. I can get back with some questions back and forth. But if we push them even inside that 30-day window, I would say it's tough.
And that's why it's also important for you to communicate with your agent. Because if you just get a letter, then at that point it's 30 days. But for us and our team, we're already having meetings and conversations 90 days out with our carriers and with our team and saying, hey, does this have a lot of losses? Is this outside a guideline? Do we think they're going to be non-renewed? And are we working that process outside of it? And so you may call us and they'll say, hey, I think we're going to get non-renewed. Go, great. We've already got it out to market. We've already started this process for you. We're working that and communicating that to our insureds ahead of time. But you want to make sure your agent is prepared in case you get renewed, that they're already doing it. Because again, if you get it at that 30 days, you're behind the 8 ball. And it's going to be very hard to play catch up after that.
That is great advice. Paul and John, thank you. Y'all are sharing a lot of great information. We do have a lot of great questions that I want to go back through all the way from the very beginning of the call. Some people asked questions. One of them I want to start with, though. Caleb asked, he said, insurance carriers cancel our policy every year to give way for renewal, and this leads to increased costs every year. Why are they doing this? And I think you kind of addressed here a minute ago about how they can be proactive ahead of getting a cancel. But are there a lot of carriers who cancel every year?
I'm thinking that that's probably going to be a notice of change of terms. It'll say not notice of non-renewal or change of terms. In certain states, it's the way they're wording it. Because every year, you're probably, I'd have to see your notice, but they're probably not canceling you every year. I would suspect that it's a notice of change of terms or non-renewal, but really what they're doing is saying, we'll renew you with a change in rate or terms. If you're getting non-renewed every year, that's odd. Okay, that would be a little odd. So we might have to
definitely outside the realm, unless you just keep having losses every year or something, something to that effect. I say that'd be very unusual for sure.
Okay. Can you, and Paula, you work in Houston, so I'm going to ask you about this. Daniel, he says they're on the coast. Can you talk about excess flood coverage?
It's going to depend on your building values, Daniel. We might have to reach out individually and talk about it. Over that 500,000 limit, we can definitely get excess flood, not a problem. But until you reach a certain threshold, you don't need it. So we'd have to talk through. But yes, we can definitely do that. Definitely.
Michael asked a question about premium signaling risk, and he asked, what is the long-term outlook on the property market? Are people going to have to do without insurance, or are governments going to have to take more of a role in subsidizing insurance?
I think what's going to happen, it depends on where you're at. If you're in Houston, Harris County, we've kind of become the new Florida all of a sudden. We have these huge deductibles and we're self-insuring so much, but we are doing some layering with London markets where we just do certain amounts of wind, or we do, a lot of that is X wind, where they're writing it with no wind coverage in those states, and we're having to go out and get standalone wind. I saw a question about, is the Texas wind pool the only option? No, there are other options out there that we go through London for. So, there are a lot of specialty products that are being developed that we didn't have years ago. We even have products that have come out on the market. If the wind gets this certain speed, it pays out. It's very unusual, but they're doing a lot of that in Florida right now. And parametrics is what it's called. So there are different ways to help you. We just need to see your certain challenge, and we can help guide you on that.
Okay, now this is a really basic question, and I think we've addressed some of these, but I know churches can save money on the cost of their building insurance by changing, how much is covered and all that. But what are just kind of maybe a top 3 things if they say, hey, we know our rates are going up, so we have to budget for that. But what's the best couple of things they could do to try to keep the cost of their building insurance down?
Yeah, when looking at it, out of the 2 sides of your package policy, your liability, you can change a few things there, but it's usually only a couple $100 that is going to change on your liability side. The bulk of that is definitely going to be your property. That's where you're going to save the most. And each one of those are individual. There's not a kind of give all to every church because everyone is so different. And so a lot of times we'll sit with our churches and just start asking questions about where they're trying to get to, what do they need. We have some churches, look at the type of buildings you have on your policy, and um, are there ones that maybe you can move to ACV, right, which is actual cash value? So there's a depreciation that comes with that, and it's a lower rate. So maybe you can downgrade your coverage there, or sometimes you can look at, depending on the total insured value, you can look at just doing a layered policy. So maybe you've got a $20 million building. Depending on how you're looking at it, maybe you get an insurance that'll only cover the first 10, right? And then you're on the hook for the other 10, but at least it's a way to cut that cost down and create some savings there for you. Then you can look at changing your all other deductible. So where you maybe have had $1,000 deductible or a $5,000 deductible for flood and fire and things like that, or not flood, water and fire. Maybe you increase that up to say 15,000 or 20,000. So you increase that deductible. That can make some changes there for you. Same thing with wind coverage. Maybe you take that out altogether, because a lot of Texas is moving to a 5% wind hail deductible. If you've got a 1 or a 2, you are definitely a lucky one, and I would keep that as long as you can. But a lot of them are 5%, and so you look at a 5%, and for folks to understand that 5% wind hail deductible is not 5% of the loss; it's 5% of the total insured value of the building that is affected. Right? Sometimes it can be different. It could be per location, depending on how it's written, but it's key to understand that. So, I mean, if you've got a $5 million building, 5% of that's a good chunk of change. So sometimes you almost are self-insuring it anyway, because you're going to have to cover that roof. So maybe you don't pay for that coverage at all, and that can lower your property value or property premium. There's different ways to look at it. There's no cookie cutter way, I would say. It really just depends on how that is. Get with your agent and just say, hey, we need to be here. We can't afford this. How can we make it to what we can afford, and how can we fit this within our budget? And then just work with them or someone who is really good at it to help navigate that for you.
I've even thought about this recently and having conversations with some churches I work with, and this is just something that in your budget in the past, your insurance has been, X. Well, now it's going to have to be X times 2. You're just going to have to budget for it differently than you did in the past because of this new normal. I saw a question earlier, and I don't see it right now. So do we expect a leveling off? Do we think this is going to get better, or are we just at a new normal?
I don't think we're going to see a decline. I don't think we're going to see as steep of a rise, John. I think we've reached our peak, but I don't think we're going to go backwards by any means. What we hope for is more capacity, right? Where we can get people back in standard markets. That's what I'm hoping happens, where we have a shift, which that will certainly help our church clients. But I don't think we're going to see a decline.
Okay, well, we want your money. We want the churches. We want their money to go to ministry.
We do.
We want you to do the work of the gospel, and we don't want you to have to spend money on these things. But these are things that can derail your work if you're not prepared. And so again, that's why we're having this, is how can you best prepare? Because then you reduce surprises, so that you can keep your money going towards the communities you're in, the people you're reaching with the gospel, and that's important to us. So next question: if a church is non-renewed
Sorry, John. Yeah. Just because it went along those lines, I wanted to answer one of these. Susie said, "Can I get coverage now, even though we wrote with a new non-standard company for our renewal date of 9/30?" So if you're with a non-standard company, or if you had to go to the surplus lines, the thing to be careful of is that you probably had a minimum earned premium on that policy. They usually do a 25% minimum earned premium. I've seen it go up to at least 35%. And what that means is that if you canceled your policy tomorrow and say, we found you another policy and you canceled it, they're only going to give you 75% of your money back. They're going to keep that 25% minimum earned premium. So if you just renewed, if you're in that boat, what I like to say is just think of it as, at minimum, you bought 3 months of coverage. It's about 25% of that policy. And so you want to start the process now to go into quoting it and trying to see if you can get something else, with the intent that 3 months from now, so basically end of December, your minimum earned premium would be done, and then you would start the new policy at that point. The reason being is you don't want to double dip, right? You just mentioned we want your money to go towards other things. If you were to cancel, you can, but again, they're going to keep that money, and then you're going to be paying twice for insurance during that same period of time. And to me, that's just not, we would not be a good steward of your money if we were to put you in that type of situation. So be careful to understand that policy in the contract there, that you do have a minimum earned premium, and be careful not to cancel it too soon.
Excellent. If a church is non-renewed for prior claims, what options do they have?
We just need to know what type of claim, John, and if it's liability driven, like slip and falls, or they need to have a narrative of what they've done to mitigate that, right?
Mhm.
If it's sidewalks being uneven, they fix that. They need to show their story and how it's been mitigated. If it's
Mhm.
related, like you said, a lot of people had freeze claims. Okay,
Mhm.
have we insulated those pipes? What have we done to mitigate that further? If we have had damage, has it been fixed? Tell our story, tell our story. If it's not a repetitive thing where we have, a carrier can take one shock loss a lot better than they can a whole bunch of claims, because that's repetition. That, that standard deviation of that one shock loss is not as bad to them, because they know everybody had that, right? So we need to see, and we need to tell your story, definitely get the damage repaired. If it's liability driven, give us a narrative of what you've done to mitigate it. And we can help you with that. A lot of times there's patterns, things that we can talk through and identify and help get you in that right position.
Good. Lynn asked a question from working with a denomination regional office. How might they bundle coverage for 20 or more churches, and would that lower their premium costs?
Bundling, we definitely are looking at things right now. Matter of fact, I had a conversation this morning. So yeah, definitely we can look at that. It's going to depend if it's one denomination, if we could do some type of master policy, or if it needs to be written individually. It might depend. It's one of those churches in Galveston County and one of those churches in a I-35 corridor for Texas. Depends on where they're located too. Are they wanting to carry that risk? So I would have to understand the schedule and the spread of risk on that. That'd be something to talk through.
Okay. Randy asks, how do I explain to our members the difference between insurance markets for churches versus residential? Because I know a lot of pastors or churches have to have, a vote to change the budget or something. And so how do they explain that difference?
Take that.
Yeah, so sorry, he's asking just between residential insurance and
residential, what they're paying for, what you and I are paying for our house, and we're like, well, mine didn't go up as much as the churches did.
Right.
Why is it going up?
Yeah, so a lot of that it's carrier driven, and there's also spread of risk, right? There's a lot more homes, so a carrier can be on a lot more, and there's just a specialization that comes with that, right? They understand how homes are affected, and you also have a home that may be 2,000 square feet, right? 3,000 square feet. And then now you're talking at a church that may be 20,000 square feet with a larger roof exposure. Maybe it's an older building versus, maybe they're in a newer subdivision or a newer home. There's a lot of differences that come along with that, that dictate that price. So they might as well just be, they're apples and oranges. They're not comparable in how they are, right? If you look at, auto insurance versus home insurance, right? It's both insurance, but they're two different things. You could RV insurance. There's a reason they specialize in different things. And there are carriers that only want to do residential who are never going to touch commercial, and vice versa, because of their risk tolerance, right? A carrier doesn't want the added exposure of residential for what's in homes and pets and all that other thing. Same thing, they don't want the same risk of churches and having 500-600 people on site every Sunday. That could be a bigger liability. So it changes a lot, and it really is just dependent on the type of carrier that is writing it that's going to make that difference between the two.
Okay. Do you recommend terrorism coverage?
No, we are not supposed to definitely recommend one way or the other. If you were sitting on the ship channel, or sitting next to a government building, I would highly be recommending that, or sitting in a high terrorist zone, sitting in New York City downtown. If you're a rural church, kind of, church, so definitely, if the premium is inexpensive, it's just a few $100s to do it, I would do it.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. If it's going to be $5,000, then you need to really weigh those factors.
Okay. Paula, I want to throw this one to you. There's a question about, is wind damage buy down coverage legitimate? Are there other options than paying that buy down cost up front?
Okay. So your buy down is definitely legitimate. What would happen is let's say you're in Harris County and you have a 5% wind hail deductible now, and you've been used to paying a 2, you can buy down the difference in between the 5 and the 2, and they're going to charge you a premium. So you need to look at it, get options from your agent, and or look at what you have on your balance sheet allocated, see the different options. Sometimes you can buy it all the way down to 1%, and there's not a lot of difference between the 1 and the 2, the 5 down to that. So you have to there's going to be 2 claims that would be processed. Your main carrier that insures the building is going to have to tell you, okay, here's your deductible, here's what it is, we've adjusted the loss. The other carrier is going to come out and look at it, and they're going to have to see that you have that deductible on the adjuster statement. Okay, so they do take a little bit longer, but they are well worth it, especially if you're in a zone with a lot of convective activity, such as possibly Dallas, Fort Worth, up near the Red River tornado activity. Down on the coast, we sell a lot of buy down policies, and you don't need them till you need them, right?
And then you need them.
All of a sudden, I don't want to pay 20,000 or 30,000 for this, but if I'm spending 20 or 30,000 and I'm buying down, $5 million, $10 million, you really have to weigh it and look and see, what.
And I know, the second part of his question, he was asking about the paying for it up front and the upfront cost of that. And that does make it hard, because they do require that paid in full, because it's
right.
That could come into play at any point. And so they have to have that up front. And that's also one that you can't do like a premium finance agreement to make that a little bit harder. So it is an upfront. And meeting with your team and talking through that, I've had many of my churches who go the other way and just say, hey, we're not going to pay the $30,000 for this buy down policy, but we're going to work to put that aside into a separate insurance savings account and kind of have that as our self-insurance cost and use it there. Because the benefit is if you never use it, now you've got that extra money sitting there. Whereas if you pay that money and you don't have to, use that wind hail buy down policy, now you've spent that money and it didn't come into play. So depending on where your church is, those are hard conversations that you have to have with your team and make a decision on, do you want to make that upfront investment, or do you want to try to put it aside and hope nothing happens and then kind of move on from there?
It's hard. It's a hard call. If we had a crystal ball, it'd be a hard call.
Okay, so we're in the closing minutes, but I'm trying to get to the rest of these questions. I see 3 that are kind of common. I'm going to put them in one question, and I think my answer is going to be call Paula or John. But one was, hey, we were just dropped by Brotherhood Mutual. What do we do? Another one, Don said, hey, we're in a small town and there's no one around here who specializes. And then there's another one said, we just got dropped by our carrier. Who do we contact? My answer, before I give it to y'all, is call John or Paula. But I'm gonna throw that to y'all, people that have been dropped by Brotherhood, or somebody who's in an area where they don't know a specialist. What can they do?
Well, in Brotherhood is a direct writer. So, they probably, or if you get dropped by Church Mutual, or you're dropped by another direct writer, we're an independent agent. So we have multiple relationships with multiple markets, and, aren't dependent on just one market. So that's one of the differences. So we would definitely love to help you. John, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, and we write in all 50 states.
Right.
So I know there was someone who was asking about North Carolina and some of the other areas. We can write in all of them. I know Paula, we have a couple in even Hawaii. So depending on where you are, we can definitely go in and help. And we've got some of our carriers are regional, specific to those areas, and some are national. And we'll go in and just kind of work through. We love to really partner and walk through what your ministry needs. That's it. We know they're not all the same, but we have a lot of experience under our belt of what other churches have gone through in the past. I joke that if something's happened at a church, Paul has seen it and walked through it and helped them and gotten them through it. So we definitely can be there to do that, and just reach out to us. And I think some of it is we're just that one-on-one time of understanding your ministry and what your ministry needs, and allowing us to kind of carve that out for what we can do to really support you.
Okay, yeah. So our contact information is here. So reach out to Paul or John, and they will help y'all. What can a church expect with that? They have a building, and the building's over 100 years old. So there's no fire sprinklers. There's probably been asbestos. There's probably all sorts of just old. It's just an old building. So what can they expect from an insurance company?
Well, there are certain carriers that will work with those risk. You're going to need that property worksheet. We need to see, okay, it's 100 years old, but what kind of wiring do you have? Have you redone your wiring? They're going to want to see those things. They're going to want to see updates. How old is the roof? Okay, have we updated plumbing, HVAC? Those are the things they're going to be looking at. And there's multiple carriers have what they call their 100-year supplemental application. They're going to want to see, but mainly what have we done to that building to make sure it's up to code, our electrical, heating, just like we would in your building. Yes, sir.
It's also important to know if it's on like a historical register, or if it's it has a mark or anything like that. That's another piece that they like to know.
Sometimes we have to get into what we call functional replacement cost. If it's got a lot of, maybe if it burns, we would not necessarily build that back. With the detailed, some of those have detailed moldings and, a very expensive detail in some of that architecture. It just depends on the church, but we've written something called functional replacement cost too, where we more so insure for what they're going to rebuild. So there's a lot of different mechanisms.
Good. Okay. Chuck asked a question. He said they're debt free, and if prices continue to climb, they're considering just doing self-insured as an option, but they'd still need the liability. And what's your opinion of that?
John, you want to take that one, or you want me to?
Yeah, the biggest thing is you definitely have more freedom when you own your building outright, and you're not beholden to a loan or a mortgage company that because some of them, if you don't choose property insurance, they're going to do what's called force placed insurance. And while they put coverage on your building for you, it's usually just for the amount of the loan, and they're the primary on that policy. So if there's a loss and it gets paid out, the bank gets the money and gets to decide what they want to do with it. The church does not benefit from that unless you really maybe that the bank person goes to your church or something like that and they want to actually help. So we've seen that go south. But so there's freedom in owning your building, but you definitely still need to have a liability coverage, especially for your abuse, and it's going to cover everything that's not your property. And then also have a plan to how you're going to self-insure your building. What will you do if there's a loss? Right? Are you just going to put money aside and then that's it? You're just going to pay those things out? Or I think you need to be even more proactive with how you self-insure by making sure that you have a really good restoration team on call, that you would know that if there is a loss, you get someone in there fast and they trust you, or you trust them, their building, they're not going to price gouge you because now you're paying out of pocket. Same thing for repairs or having a good roofer, and that your maintenance is even more on point. You can do those things, and we can walk through that proactive systems and strategies that you need to have if you go that route, but still do not forego having liability or abuse or auto liability. Make sure you have those other coverages and just know that you're on the hook for the property side of it. That's a big piece.
All right. Let's see. We're down to the final couple minutes. Given the state of the country, there's an increase of violence and terrorism. Can you say something about certified, licensed armed staff and being, on campus? How does that affect insurance?
Boy, that's the million.
That's a whole nother webinar, I think.
A whole nother webinar.
I tell you, I
We'll do
really,
that one next.
yeah, that is very carrier specific, and it definitely depends on what we mean by certified licensed. So,
Okay.
I think we need to, if they could reach out to us, we can talk through that in more detail. That every carrier loves the off-duty armed police officer. That's a volunteer or that's paid. Okay. I can answer that in a blanket statement.
Mm-hmm.
Any way that you can defer that risk to someone else. So even if you employ a security team and you get their insurance, same thing, think building use, but you're doing it specifically for a security team where they show their certificate of insurance that they have coverage and that's primary by a security team, that's going to help, mitigate that risk and kick it off of that carrier and make you secondary. So any carrier is going to love that. But then you get outside of that, you'll get into the realm of active shooter policies and some of those other things that, like I said, would probably be its own conversation. But yeah, if you reach out to us directly, we can talk through that. We've done that quite a bit.
Yeah, again, I'm going to answer one question. Somebody asked about Little League sports using the property or neighbors using the property. Anytime somebody outside your organization comes on your property to use it, you need to have an agreement. You need to have a plan. And just because anything could happen. And so I would encourage you, if we didn't answer your question, please reach out to Paula or John. Our contact information, our emails and phone numbers are right here on the screen. We would love to help you think through those issues. The whole point of doing this webinar today is because we see this as a critical issue for churches and ministries as they navigate just doing operating. There's been so many storms in the last few years, so many things that have come up on the liability side that if your church hasn't really gotten into this, Insurance One Agency, Paula and John and their whole team there, I've known them for a long time and I fully endorse, and I know they're going to point you in the right direction. Church Realty put this on today, and our heart is we want to serve the church. We want you to do ministry, and we understand that insurance issues and real estate issues and construction issues and all those things come up in the normal time of you doing business and building buildings and taking care of things. But sometimes you have advice from people who maybe aren't the experts. And so maybe you've gotten an insurance policy that maybe wasn't the best thing for you. So talk with Paul and John. Their team will help you. And we really just wanted to do this because we see this as a critical issue. So there's a few more questions. We will try to get those answered to you via email. We have your contact information. This was broadcast to YouTube, so we will have this live on our website at churchrealty.com. We'll also be able to send you out the recording. We will be sending some of the resources here we discussed. And we'll make sure we get that to you. Paula, John, do y'all have anything in closing that we need to say?
I would just say thank you so much for joining us today. And if you are being non-renewed, like John said, jump on that quick. We definitely are here to help and serve you. Our hearts to serve the ministry. We've been doing it for many years, and we so appreciate it. John, I'll let you.
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, John.
No, I was just going to say thanks. And sorry, I was typing an answer. I meant to answer one of these, and I just put his name and then hit enter, and it just sent that. So it didn't help his question. So I'm going to try to answer some of these on the side here. But yeah, we would love to just offer advice and be a partner for you. So if there's an opportunity for us to serve you and your church, please just reach out to us. And if not, if there's even if you just have a current policy and you say, hey, we just don't even know what we have. Can you help just advise us on it or review this policy and look for any gaps in our policy, things like that. We'd love to do that too. And then just kind of give you some of the questions that you may not have been able to get to here. We can work that outside of here. So thank you all for the opportunity.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all for joining us. And we look forward to talking to you again and serving you. And God bless you all. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
John, for hosting.